debating the issues that matter. Now on BBC One, here's David Dimbleby.
Tonight, 5 weeks into the coalition government, we're in Plymouth. Welcome to Question Time. And with us here tonight, the new Secretary of State for Media, Culture and Sport, Jeremy Hunt. His predecessor, now his opposite number in the Shadow Cabinet, Ben Bradshaw. Salma Yaqoob, leader of the anti-war Respect Party that was formed by George Galloway. The journalist and film writer Toby Young. And the Apprentice star and former independent candidate in the European elections, Katie Hopkins. And just a reminder, these questions, of course, come from our audience here. They decide what we're going to talk about, and the panel don't know the questions until they hear them from the lips of the first questioner, Linda Kernow.
Is the coalition government asking the public for suggestions for spending cuts simply a way of passing the buck, or have they run out of ideas already?
This is the idea that all the public, everybody indeed, should be involved in the cuts. Ben Bradshaw.
Well, I'm always in favour of consultation, but I think the questioner is right. It was Nigel Lawson this week, the former Conservative Chancellor, who described it as a PR ploy. And my worry about this is it's part of a classic softening up exercise by the new government, firstly to blame its predecessor, but secondly to prepare the country for cuts which I think will be excessive and damaging. We've had another group of economists coming out today to warn that the level of cuts that the government are proposing will tip the country back into recession, will push unemployment up to 3 million, will cost us all much more in the long run. None of us argues with the fact that we have to reduce the deficit. The question is how quickly you do it, how steeply you do it, and who shoulders the burden. The other thing the coalition have said, of course, they want to protect the weak and the vulnerable, but the first things they're cutting are free school dinners for some of the poorest families, projects to get young unemployed back into work, and our social and council housing programme. 3 things.
Yeah, but the question is about the method of consulting. You'll remember, of course, that your own Prime Minister tried to have what he called a national conversation. Do you remember that?
I thought it was called a big conversation.
Well, I know, big, small. Did it happen? I didn't think it happened.
Yes, it did happen.
Sort of went on.
I mean, these things are worthwhile to a certain level, but in the end, the government is about taking difficult choices, and when you're consulting people, one group of people wants one thing and another group of people wants another. In the end, the government has to make those choices, and it has to take the responsibility for doing so.
All right. George Osborne, Jeremy Hunt, said that he wants everybody, trade unions, think tanks, and members of the public, all engaged in debate and discussion about how we deal with the problem. Why not government dealing with the problem and deciding?
Well, the government is dealing with the problem, and it's taken a very decisive start. Already within a week of taking office, we announced cuts and efficiency savings of £6 billion so that we could avoid the jobs tax that Labour were planning. I'm afraid Ben's answer demonstrates that he really doesn't get the gravity of the situation that his government bequeathed to us. We have the largest deficit in the developed world, the largest deficit in our peacetime history. And why is it that we want to ask people to contribute to this process? Because we have to carry the whole country with us in this incredibly difficult problem that Ben and his colleagues left us. Why is this so important? Because if we lose the confidence of the international community, it will be far, far worse. Look what happened in Greece.
Yeah, but hang on a second, you're getting off the point.
Because
look, here we've got 150 members of this audience. Presumably they'll have all sorts of different ideas about where you should make cuts. Everybody has ideas.
Yes,
and you're going to accept them all? What's the point?
Well, I think we should certainly listen to them, but it's not that we're not saying where we think cuts should be. We've already announced £6 billion, and we are going to have to announce many, many more, and we've got the budget coming up. But my point is that unless we take this action soon, in Greece, where they didn't take action soon enough, they had to lay off 17,000 teachers. And we do want to protect the vulnerable, we do want to protect the weakest people, the people who depend on those public services. But the best way to do that is to put our national finances onto a sustainable basis. And I think it was Lord Miners, a former Labour minister, a colleague of Ben's, who said there is nothing progressive at all about spending money that you're not getting back in taxes. That is the most dangerous thing you can do for people who depend on public services.
Salma Yaqoob, Do you think the government's right to ask the public for suggestions about how to cut?
I think the government is right to consult the public, but they're asking a very disingenuous question. The problem we have is a deficit. They're not asking our opinion on how to cut the deficit. They're asking our opinion on how to cut public spending, because the government's already made its own conclusions and already decided that public spending is the way to reduce deficit. And I'm actually impressed how this government has managed to induce mass amnesia and the narrative that this deficit has somehow been caused by irresponsible public spending, when of course it wasn't that. It was irresponsible spending and the gambling on behalf of the private financial sector and the banking sector, which the public sector.
Katie Hopkins.
I know it's never frightfully popular to talk about debt in terms of something that might be perhaps positive for us, but I do feel that innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, those are all things that are born out of times of famine, not times of plenty. And times like this do enable us as citizens of our country to make decisions about where we need to make cuts, about what would be a good idea for us to cut. At the end of the day, our government, our public sector has become bloated. It's like some enormous, tourist in Speedos, and it's not attractive to look at. We need to look at our economy, look at where we need government and look at where we don't. We need government that will provide us with education and health, of course, although some of those could be incentivised into the private sector. We need infrastructure. We need it to look after our disabled and elderly.
Are you going to write a letter to the Chancellor saying where you think things should be cut?
No, but my point is that these are the areas where I think we do need government. Perhaps we could agree, but there are areas where we don't need government, and those are the areas we need to look at making cuts, and those are the areas, in many cases, where the private sector would do a better job for us.
All right. Toby, I'll come to you in a moment. Let's go to the man there in blue, and then go to... yes, you, sir, first.
The last government continued to borrow money, even when we're in a boom period. So that can't be right. So there wasn't exactly being fiscally tight.
Okay, and on the point that the questioner made, of a wide public consultation, do you think it's a good idea?
I do think it's a good idea, although how you're going to implement it is going to be a little bit difficult. You can't exactly ask 56 million people their individual opinions.
Jeremy Hunt, how do you deal with it?
Well, I think the point is that we don't think that we have all the answers, and it may be that there are people who are users of public services at the very bottom of the pyramid, people on the benefit system who can tell us where the money is needed and where it's being wasted. And the whole purpose of this approach is to try and minimise the impact on the people who are most dependent on critical public services.
Actually, the very opposite will happen. It's the least well-off in our society who will bear the pain of the deficit which they did not help create. And can I also say, actually, you are forcing people to become dependent on the state. We are going to see our social welfare budget bloom when you see all these people lose their jobs, whether it's public sector jobs, and once you lose public sector jobs, the private sector also loses jobs. I'm a councillor in Birmingham. Now that the Building Schools for the Future programme is being slashed, private construction firms will lose those contracts. They will not have jobs because we have a recession. There's no alternative demand. Actually, stimulating the economy, investing, and may I make the point also?
I think you've made enough points. No, it may be important. I think you made 2 points enough. I haven't had Toby Young yet, and I want to hear him, and I'll come back to you later.
Toby Young.
You've made that, please. Salma, you're talking as if you already know the contents of the emergency budget. You know exactly where the cuts are going to fall, and it's not true either that the entire burden of cutting the deficit is going to fall on the least well-off. The government have actually said, in addition to a pupil premium, they're going to reduce taxes for low-income earners. And actually, it's also going to fall on high-income earners too. The government have said they're not going to cut the highest rate of tax at 50%. They're not going to introduce an inheritance cut. They're going to increase capital gains tax. I think that consulting the public about where the cuts should fall is a good idea, but I think they should go further and also consult the public about where the taxes should come to.